discuss recommendations for improving nutritional status of children with ASD, and then also talk briefly about general principles of a healthy diet. So, who can give me some examples of some nutrition concerns in kids with autism spectrum disorders? Anything that, yeah?
A concern would be making sure that they get all 5 food groups.
Okay, so balance, maybe maybe the child has food selectivity where they're just primarily eating from one food group, sometimes 2 food groups. Good. Anything else? Yes?
My son smells the food.
Okay. So certain behaviors or patterns around the meal time or with food. Anything else? Textures. So maybe food selectivity or refusal based on textures of food. Good. So we'll talk about all of those in addition to talking about common nutrient deficiencies in kids with ASD. We'll focus on overweight and underweight, food selectivity, obsessive or perseverative interests about food presentation or the routine, new food anxiety, food or fluid refusal, and then some other kind of non-nutritional factors, but that affect nutritional status. So first of all, I want to talk about a couple of common nutrient deficiencies in kids with ASD. So we've had some recent research that came out of the Marcus Center, actually, indicating that kids with autism spectrum disorders have lower intake of calcium and lower intake of protein. And because of that, there are significant nutrition implications. So first of all, suboptimal growth is an issue, whether it's suboptimal growth in stature, like height of a child, or their actual weight. Also disturbance in mood or emotion or behavior, and which can be frustrating when we're already trying to manage various behaviors in children. And then nutrient deficiencies also can result in suboptimal body functions, can decrease our immune system function, our vascular system, and also our metabolic system. And then it can also affect cognitive function. So next I want to talk about overweight and underweight and kind of cover those collectively together. So as far as understanding expected childhood growth, we're going to talk about proportionality, how we assess a child's growth. Primarily, we're looking at their ratio of weight to height. And then I'll also talk a little bit about preventing overweight and obesity, and then concerns for undernutrition. So we all know we go into the doctor's office, one of the first things, if not the first thing that they do, is they measure our child's height and they measure our child's weight. And they either tell us or they show us where our child is on the growth chart, and oftentimes they're, as far as length and weight, they're looking at if the child is following a consistent growth curve. But when we're looking at proportionality, we have to consider the body mass index and where that falls on a percentile chart. So body mass index, many of you have probably heard of that. We use it for adults to determine if we're overweight or at a healthy weight, or if we're underweight. And likewise, we use the body mass index percentile to determine if a child is at a healthy weight or above or below. So body mass index is the weight in kilograms over the height in meters squared. So once we get that value, we plot that also on a growth chart. So you can see the growth charts for body mass index percentile look a little different. So starting at age 2 on the growth chart, as you can see that somewhere between age 5 and age 8 in boys and girls, that's kind of the lowest, their thinnest point. So if we're looking at proportionality, we're looking at their weight versus their height. So at somewhere in that age range, they're going to be real trim. Okay, so for example, if we're looking at a 6-year-old who's at the 50th percentile, their body mass index is going to be around 16.5. And just to put that in perspective, if I, as an adult, had a body mass index of 16.5, I would be grossly underweight. Okay, so kids, their shapes are different than adults, but we're still looking at the ratio between their weight and their height to determine if they're at a healthy range. So once we obtain a percentile for their body mass index, we can then determine their weight status. So kids that fall less than that 5th percentile are classified as underweight. A healthy weight range is between the 5th percentile and just under the 85th percentile. So that's actually a really big range. Kids are given a big range to be called healthy. That just accommodates for individual differences, genetics, and that type of thing. And then kids that are over the 85th percentile are classified as overweight or obese. So for example, if you can see this chart, this is kind of the same growth curve for boys looking at body mass index percentiles. So you can see that kids, a 10-year-old boy, they're going to be underweight if they fall below kind of, if they have a body mass index of around 13 or around there, then they're going to be classified as underweight. And then conversely, if they're above the 85th percentile, so above a body mass index of about 20, they're going to be overweight. And oftentimes, it's not uncommon for me to see kids that are well below this 5th percentile category or well above even the 95th percentile category, and then they're actually classified as obese. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So what are some risks of being overweight or obese? Anybody? So what are they for adults? Why do we want to keep ourselves at a healthy weight? Mm-hmm.
Because hip complications or knee complications.
Good.
Pain.
Good. So orthopedic complications. I've recently read that for every 10 pounds overweight an adult is, that can add somewhere between 40 to 60% more stress on those lower extremities. So you can see how it can really add up. And as was mentioned, there are a lot of orthopedic complications, pain, discomfort that can occur with that. And then also more common medical, I'm sorry?
Sleep apnea.
Sleep apnea. So additional medical chronic complications that are associated with overweight or obesity. Sleep apnea, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, those really common things that we see with overweight or obesity. Unfortunately, we're seeing that now with kids. 30 years ago, that really didn't exist. But now we're seeing a lot of those complications present in children, even as young as 6 years old sometimes, which is pretty significant. All right, so preventing overweight and obesity. Nothing here is really rocket science. It's just good healthy habits. Encouraging active play. Limiting screen time, so that includes iPads, computers, thank you, TV, and video games, everything. And then eating right, so establishing healthy eating habits at early ages, and we'll talk a little bit more specifics in a little bit about that. And then staying on course. So we're talking about lifelong healthy habits, not 3-month windows of time, just maintaining healthy habits for a long time, which can be a significant challenge with life and busyness and whatnot. Okay, so flipping to the other end, looking at risks of being underweight. Nutrition deficiencies that I specifically mentioned, frequent nutrition deficiencies in kids with ASD, but we can also have, kids can also present with other nutrient deficiencies. We can see poor growth when kids are underweight, whether it's in stature or physical weight. And as I mentioned before, decreased immunity. And then also, when we're not nourished properly, we can be less effective, have less effective participation in school, other activities, and therapies as well. So preventing underweight or undernutrition, it's always important first and foremost to continue to provide varied food options. So even though a child may not take and accept a wide variety of foods, it's always good to continue to offer and provide those options. Sometimes we need to offer calorie boosters or oral supplements as needed. So this just entails kind of taking the child's current eating habits and finding a way to make it more calorie dense and hopefully more nutrient dense in the process. If they're undernourished calorically and are underweight, we're finding ways to maybe add Carnation Instant Breakfast to the milk they drink, or adding a milkshake every day, things like that, just to kind of increase the calorie intake significantly. Also, we might use oral supplements, things like Pediasure, or there are many other products that are out there as well. Those are all really best kind of implemented with the help of a physician or another medical professional. And then also considering vitamin supplementation. So there are many cases where we might not have, a child might not have a balanced diet, and a general multivitamin might be appropriate in that case. Now, a lot of people come to me and they say, but I've tried every single children's vitamin out there and my kid won't take any of them. That is definitely a difficult situation. There are a couple of approaches in that situation that we recommend trying. One is that if a child is used to taking pills, like swallowable, like regular pills, sometimes they can take a multivitamin. Even if it's a children chewable kind, they can take it as a pill, even just cutting it in half and doing it that way. That's one option. And then sometimes we'll recommend taking the actual chewable vitamin, like chopping it up real finely, and then putting it into something that the child eats. So perhaps applesauce or like apple juice, if that's a food that they are already eating.
question.
Yes.
Any other suggestions for calorie boosters besides like a pre-prepared, like the instant breakfast or the Pediasure? Like, would you use like palm oils or coconut oils, butter,
So
stuff like that?
I actually have a whole handout, which I did not bring today. But if afterwards, if you come here, I can get your email and information, and I can provide that for you.
That'd be great. Thanks.
All right, food selectivity. When we started out, a couple of you indicated that food selectivity was certainly a challenge with kids with ASD. So some kids might show food selectivity over the type of food. So perhaps they're eating only foods in the grains food category, whether it's frozen waffles, goldfish crackers, Cheez-Its, and maybe toast. And those are kind of the foods that they stick to. Certainly, when we have that, we're not getting, a varied diet and a balance of nutrients. So it can be the type of food. We can show food selectivity around the texture. Some kids like real crunchy things. Some kids like softer foods. It can be wet foods or dry foods. So all kinds of texture, food selectivity, even the brand of food. Sometimes I have kids that come into me and the parents will say, my kid will only eat such and such brand of chicken nugget, and that's the only thing, and no matter how I try to mix it up, they know exactly the brand. And likewise the container. So they'll recognize the packaging of the food and know that that's the preferred food that they will accept. And then also visual presentation can be a challenge. Or that's one route of food selectivity. So if the foods, yes?
My daughter will eat strawberry if I cut it nicely on forks.
Correct. So that is absolutely an example of food presentation. Exactly.
Is that a concern?
What's that?
Is that a concern?
The way it's presented, if she's eating strawberries, that's great.
Nicely fruits and she can eat and it's okay.
All right. Yeah.
And she doesn't really like water but drinks milk. It's the water that she doesn't drink that. Like she would drink juice, milk, but not really water.
Yeah. So it's something where I would continue to encourage the water and give her plenty of options to try that. But I'm really happy that she drinks milk. Yeah. Good. Continue to offer it, definitely. Okay, so certainly there are some nutrition implications with selective eating, and many of these are similar implications that we've seen with other challenges. So the first recommendation is really to keep introducing a new food. It can be frustrating, but really in a non-pressured way, to continue to offer the foods over and over again and have them be available. Because once it's very easy to say, well, my kid doesn't eat broccoli, and then just kind of eliminate that from the options that they're being presented with. It can take anyone actually up to 20 tries of a food till they actually accept it. So given that, your child might not like green beans this week, they might not like them next week, they might not like them the week after that, but hopefully one day they will try and accept the food. So with selective eating, there are possibilities for alternative sources of nutrients. So we can kind of find ways, for example, say your child eats all kinds of fruits, but not all kinds of vegetables, or won't eat vegetables, something like that. We can find ways to kind of manipulate nutrients that are commonly found in certain vegetables. We can kind of make sure that the child is being offered fruits that have comparable nutrients. So that's another situation where working with a nutritionist can be really, really helpful in that situation. Okay, as we said before, sometimes a pediatric multivitamin is needed, and then also with selective eating, there are times certainly that behavioral or feeding intervention is indicated. The Feeding Disorders Program at Kennedy certainly sees many kids with ASD, and a child might come in and literally eat 3 foods. So it might be strawberry milk, apple juice, and Honey Nut Cheerios, and that's it. So that certainly is a case where a little more intervention is appropriate. All right, so can anyone think of any situations or examples of obsessive or perseverative interests about food? Yes?
I had one student that only wanted to eat something that was always orange.
Okay, so only orange foods. Okay, right, exactly. And then were any situations where like the child is always thinking about kind of when's the next meal coming? When are we going to eat again? That kind of behavior also. And then new food anxiety. Sometimes just the thought of having a new food presented can cause pretty significant behavior, whether it's tantrums or undesirable behavior. All right, so food or fluid refusal. All right, so indications of food refusal: the child moving their head away when the food is presented, batting at the spoon, pushing it away, spitting food out, throwing the food, throwing the plate over, holding food in the mouth. So sometimes you can pocket food like between the cheek and the gum line there and just not swallow. And then certainly in that situation, you can also have tantrums or undesirable behavior. And then also leaving the table, just getting up and going, not staying. Okay, and then other non-nutritional factors. So we can have oral motor issues, so where literally the tongue may not have enough control to physically manipulate food in the mouth properly in order to get it to the back of your mouth in order where it needs to be in order to swallow. So some kids might have oral motor difficulties, sensory issues where just anything around the mouth is uncomfortable. A lot of times these kids might also have difficulty brushing their teeth. Difficulty with change of routine can be a challenge, or medical or dental problems. Food allergies or sensitivities. So children with undiagnosed food allergies, when they're young, they might eat a food and then they might feel sick, uncomfortable in the belly or whatnot. They develop an association between food and feeling bad. And in those cases, you can have a lot of food refusal and food selectivity issues around that. And then social and emotional factors and family eating habits. So we're always, as parents and caregivers, we're always kind of the primary role model. And we want to have good eating habits so that we can encourage good eating habits to those around us as well. All right, so just in summary, we can list are the consequences of a poor diet. So there's risk for nutrient deficiencies, as we've mentioned already, risk for overweight or obesity. Certainly on the other end of the spectrum, risk for underweight or poor growth, and risk for decreased immunity, poor wound healing in some situations, and less effective participation in school and other activities. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. All right, so I wanted to mention the gluten-free, casein-free diet. In 2008, the Cochrane, a physician by the last name of Cochrane and colleagues did a review of all the data that was out there about the gluten-free, casein-free diet. And at that time, they could not recommend, they determined that the GFCF could not be recommended as standard treatment based on the evidence that they had. And then the START study, this is based out of the University of Rochester. This was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, so kind of like the best study design possible. And their results, they found that kids using the gluten-free, casein-free diet there was no effect on sleep, no difference in stool frequency, no difference in attention rating by the parents, and there was no difference in the amount of activity that they had. So just based on the information that we have out there, the medical community really cannot promote elimination diets like the gluten-free, casein-free diet. But it's important. I know there's tons of anecdotal evidence out there, and certainly on the web, or friends that you might have, of people that are using these elimination diets with their kids, and they're reporting good results. So even though the medical community doesn't recommend this, if you were to pursue this, I would always recommend in conjunction with a nutritionist, because any elimination diet, if you eliminate an entire food group or grouping of foods, you're certainly at risk for any nutrient deficiencies. So I would always recommend with some sort of support. Okay, so I wanted to switch gears and just, so I've talked all about kind of the complications and challenges and different scenarios that we see. And now I wanted to switch gears to just kind of giving us a little bit of kind of the foundation in healthy eating. So one of the primary models of feeding kids, it's called the parent-child feeding relationship. And it's a pretty basic set of guidelines, but in a lot of situations is really helpful. So this feeding model says that it's the parent's role, that they are responsible for what is presented, so what is offered to eat, and the manner in which it's presented. So, sounds pretty simple, right? And then it's the child's role for how much or even whether they're going to eat in that situation. So, one of the first kind of the founding principles of this model is that a parent first needs to have good eating habits, okay? So that includes trusting yourself, being positive and dependable about feeding yourself, enjoy your food, emphasize variety, don't use negative terms like being bad or being good about food, and be disciplined, but not negative, okay? So it's important to know that pressure doesn't work when trying to get our kids to eat certain foods. So coercing or withholding treats or desserts or bribing, and putting pressure on food acceptance. It's, in the long run, not very effective. So why do we do this? It's really hard not to push our kids to eating certain foods, right? So we've all had experiences like that. I'm guessing that everyone in this room has had an experience like that. I certainly have, where I was required to eat a certain food. And then we also get a lot of outside pressure or advice from peers or family members telling us that, oh, your kid really needs to eat this, and we feel a lot of pressure to follow through with that. All right, so just using helpful language. I'm sure you're not going to be able to see this on your handout. It's probably too small. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So just, always bringing positive language into the mix. All right. So I wanted to just talk a little bit quickly about components of a healthy meal. Has everyone seen this, familiar with this graphic? Yeah, okay. All right, so my plate is the model that is promoted by, or published and created by the United States Department of Agriculture. Remember the food pyramid that we used to have? Okay, this replaced the food pyramid. So basically, we've got 5 food groups. The grains food group, I typically like to call the grains and starchy vegetables food group, or the grains and starches food group. But on a very basic level, if you just have a standard plate, half of what you're eating should be fruits or vegetables. So for most Americans, that means eating more fruits and vegetables and less grains and less on the protein. We tend to feature our protein or meat, but this model indicates that really, like, those fruits and vegetables are really the more featured food. All right, so within that framework, understanding that there are several general principles of a healthy diet. So one is balance, as you can see. If you're distributing your plate like this, where half of what you're eating is on your plate, fruits and vegetables, a smaller portion of protein, a smaller portion of grains, then you've got good balance there. Variety, having lots of options and varied choices in each of those food groups is always best. Certain foods have higher amounts in specific nutrients and others have lower. So variety over a longer period of time or several days, we end up balancing our nutrients that way. And then moderation. So that's kind of the key. That's kind of goes with balance very well. And within those food groups, we can say that in general, for dairy, we want low-fat or no-fat dairy choices. So 1% or skim milk options. Grains, we want the majority of our grains to be whole grains and not so many of the refined options. Proteins, lean protein choices. So legumes, beans, chicken, fish, leaner options of protein as well. Okay, so then moving back a little bit, I'm kind of jumping around in here a little bit here. So following up with the parents' feeding tasks, knowing that you can choose and prepare healthy options of food based on kind of our model that we talked about. and provide regularly scheduled meals and snacks. And then your job is to make meal times pleasant. Okay, so then therefore the model suggests that the child's eating capabilities, that children will eat, they'll know how much to eat, and that children will eat a variety of food and grow predictably. So that being said, I realize that many of us work with or have children that fall into a category where they have special considerations. So that includes kids who have a hard time eating with feeding disorders, developmental disabilities, or kids that are critically or chronically ill. And then certainly there are children who have a hard time eating enough and may receive additional support. So I'm giving you the model as a guideline, and then knowing that, you know, we might have children that we're working with some of these special considerations. And then just a side note, I really encourage some meal planning. So sitting down once a week to plan meals is really, really fine. I find it really helpful, kind of across the board for all people, for all families, really. It helps you eat healthier. You end up saving money. You save time, actually, because you're not running out to the grocery store at the last minute to pick up an ingredient that you need for the meal for tonight, that type of thing. And it can make grocery shopping more efficient, and also grocery lists help prevent those impulsive purchases and eliminates the last minute stress. Also, if you have a child who is kind of perseverates around food and is saying, well, what's for dinner, what's for dinner, what's for dinner? You know, having a plan can kind of eliminate any kind of negotiation that's there. Okay? So, and you can see on your page, I added some additional tips. You can review those on your own. So that's it for me. Are there any questions?